Thank you so much for joining us on this week's Good News Show, where we are continuing our conversation with Holly English, talking about the mental health of our students and the fear of the virus, but also addressing systemic racism in schools as well. So let's go ahead and jump right into part 2 of this interview. So now, with schools getting ready to start, or starting, so how would you address, because I know some people are very fearful right now. Some people, yes, honestly, they don't believe the virus exists.
Yeah, it's a whole spectrum.
How would you speak into someone who is very fearful, and then someone who is not fearful at all? What are your, as far as if someone's struggling with fear, coming to a school counselor, maybe they don't feel comfortable even being around people right now. What are some stuff that you are doing in order to care for them as well?
That's a great question. So with the ones that are extremely fearful, definitely talking with them about realistic thought processes. Really, what are you fearful of? Are you fearful of, catching the disease versus are you fearful of the unknowns, or are you fearful of a future that you have no idea what's going to happen? So really, what is the basis of that fear? And then helping them disseminate that and helping them kind of fight and battle what might be unrealistic. There's a part of that fear that's realistic. And so we have to acknowledge that too. And then there's sometimes that it can go so far that it's inhibiting your life. And that's not healthy. So talking about that, and then also when we have fear, a lot of times that may come across as or manifest as anxiety. So if it's manifesting as anxiety, how do you cope with that? Do you need to sit down and journal? Do you need to play music? Do you need to go on a walk? What is it that's going to help you be more healthy in coping with what's happening right now? And that could go either way in any kind of situation, any kind of coping skills that we can increase, and affect regulation, that's emotional regulation, that's always going to be helpful. And then for the ones that are on the other spectrum, they're not fearful at all, I would just really highly encourage looking from the outsider's perspective of, okay, that's great that you're not fearful of this, and that's where you stand, but making sure that you're abiding by the guidelines, because it's about us as a community. It's not about you as an individual. So for the ones that really aren't fearful at all, that are just kind of coming in, just making sure that, hey, it's really important that these things are in place, masks are in place, washing your hands are in place for a reason. Like, there is evidence to show that these things are beneficial. So just making sure that you're honoring those around you, because this is a community experience. It's not just an individual experience. So kind of going both ways on that.
Gotcha. Okay. Awesome. Now, how would you, because I know personally, having a elementary age child, the thought of, kindergartners trying to keep masks on, while also not messing with their face all the time. What do we do about that? Is there fear with them taking their masks off? How we get them to follow that, or maybe not follow that, but still take precautions with really young kids as well as high schoolers?
That's a great question. Let me think about it for a second. So kids naturally model adults. That's one thing that I feel like is something that we can take into this, is that if you are doing your part and wearing your mask and washing your hands and kind of doing what you can to protect others, kids will naturally model that. Your kindergartners, your first graders, second graders, all the way up to my high schoolers that I have, they will naturally model how we are approaching things as an adult. We're seeing that right now with discrimination and everything that's happening in our society anyways. Kids will naturally model what they're shown. So I think as a young child, it's going to be difficult. It's not going to be easy having them keep on their mask and having them make sure that they're, but I mean, things that they already teach in Head Start and pre-K is washing your hands before you go eat a meal. I mean, they really do hit those very basic and important hygiene skills, even at that very, very early age. So I think that helping your young child know that it's okay, that we're going to be okay. This is just to help keep us safe. This is it's like a seatbelt. This is what we have to do. And giving them some examples and giving them some guidance with that is very, very important. Also, managing your own anxiety with that and managing your own anxiety in front of that child. Because, like I said, they model our own behaviors. If you're very, very highly fearful and anxious in front of that young child, there's a greater chance that that young child's going to be also manifesting fearfulness and anxiousness. So, even if you have to figure out how to cope with it in front of your child and you can deal with it on the other side, that's something to think about. So, as long as we can go in and really help teach our young kids, this is what we're going to be doing because this is what keeps everybody safe, and doing the best that we can to make sure that they're washing their hands and they're doing their part, it's not going to be easy. And that's pretty much the best way I can answer that. But the guidelines are in place for a reason.
Yeah, awesome. Let's see here. So where currently, with right now, there's not a lot of good that we can see, but I believe that it is still out there. Yeah. Where do you see, hope right now?
Yeah. Personally, I've seen hope pretty much everywhere. Something that I think that we have to remember as a community and as a society and even as Christians is that there's not much growth without discomfort. And so I think that although this situation is tragic and there's a lot of tragedy within this experience, not just the pandemic, but also the discrimination and the hate that's happening, is that without discomfort, we would not move forward and we would not grow. So I can see hope in the fact that this is making us reassess maybe how we interact with people, maybe how we're experiencing our home lives, maybe how we're interacting and engaging with others, even to the extent of what do we know about others that look like us or that don't look like us. So I do think that there's hope in that. We are learning and we are growing, even if it's taking a lot of pain that goes with that. Another thing that I really truly believe is that there have been so many pockets of joy that God's brought into this situation. There's many, many, many kids that have great homes. And so these parents have this almost unique opportunity that their kids are home with them. And that might be the first time that they're actually looking at their kids face to face in a long time, because you're so consumed with sports and you're so consumed with whatever life is throwing at you. So maybe these parents are seeing that joy and that hope in the fact that, oh, I got to have this unexpected time with my child. For the parents that work 2-3 jobs, that may be the first time that they're really able to connect with their child because their child's at school all day and then they're working another job to try to support their child. Now they finally get to see their child and experience time with their child. I mean, there's so much beauty in that. And I just feel like God is able to maneuver through all the small, fine details of this time. Not to say that there won't be hard times, not to say that there's not tragedy, not to say that there's not grief and loss, because there's been so much grief and loss. But even in grief and loss, we can see life after death. And I do think that that is some of the hope in the times. Another thing I was really hopeful for was how our community as a school system is more of my perception of it, but as how our community mental health perspectives and personnel and our school personnel came together and really did whatever they could to move forward. And they're looking in the future. It's not necessarily stuck and wallowing in the situation. They're trying to come up with plans that we will grow through this. And I find hope in that.
That's awesome. So you mentioned another, a really difficult thing that's going on right now, and that is the discrimination. So how would you speak into maybe someone as a child? I couldn't imagine that, but that has been discriminated or has been judged because of their color. Right. How would you speak into starting that healing process, and maybe even talking to those who maybe have judged people by their color? What are ways that we can move forward as a community, and especially as kids? Because I know my younger kids, they don't really notice anything because they're so innocent, which is beautiful. But how do we move forward as childlike faith? How do we move forward as a community in all aspects of, maybe you've been discriminated, maybe you've been judged by your color, maybe you just don't know, this was going on. And what are things we can do to make sure that everyone is loved and that everyone sees the love of Jesus?
Yeah. That's a great question. Something that I think we need to start with is acknowledging that systemic racism exists, and that these experiences exist. If we fail to acknowledge that people have had these experiences, that they've gone through something like this, it may feel better to us because we don't have to address it, which is not good. It's not growth oriented. It's not Jesus like either. But acknowledging that systemic racism, one, exists, two, that it perpetuates throughout our society. And that's on every single level that we can even address. So if you do have a student or a person that's in front of you and they've felt oppressed, if they've felt that they've experienced, there's a whole gamut of experiences that they could have in this. And if they have experienced that, one, acknowledging that that's their truth and that has existed. Two, loving like Jesus looks very different than what we've done in the past. And we have to be able to stop and look internally at our own hearts before we can address what's going on outside. So something that I know that our community is really pushing and that our society is really pushing right now is learning. So that's one of the best things. Again, you're not going to grow without discomfort. It might be uncomfortable for you to say, hey, that thing that you said was a racist statement. I need to be able to accept that, okay, I made a racist statement that was inaccurate of me and unkind and unloving. It's not like Jesus. And then this is how I want to change and respond. This is how I want to grow. This is how I want to learn. So I have to be uncomfortable to do that. That's vulnerability. It goes back to vulnerability. If I'm not willing to be vulnerable and accept what I may or may not have done, even subconsciously, that could hurt other people, then there's a bigger issue that needs to be addressed. That may be pride. It may be a stronghold in your life. It may be something. But I think as individuals, if we can own our own statements, our own belief systems, and question it, there's nothing wrong, even in your own spiritual journey, to ask questions. You should be able to look into your own heart and be able to ask questions as well. Why do I think this way? Why did I respond that way to that person? Why do I think it's okay when somebody makes that joke and I don't even think twice about it? You need to be able to ask those questions. So fostering insight to where you're at and then starting from there to grow. There's so many, there's resources out there right now. There's books that you can read. There's podcasts you can listen to. There's speakers that talk about this that have a much greater depth of knowledge on this than I do. And you just put yourself out there in a position to learn. We talk in the church, about heart postures. I know that that's something that is not an uncommon conversation for us, but how much do we actually address our heart posture towards people that don't have the same experience as us? Not just look different, but then also that their entire experience may be totally different from ours. But that doesn't mean that Jesus doesn't love them. They're the same child as we are. And so I think just putting yourself in a position to learn about that experience, whatever that happens to be, and honoring them for their experience, whatever that happens to be, is the first place to start. And it's so beautiful with kids. You can talk to young kids and just ask about their experiences, and they're so bold and they're so honest that if you're uncomfortable having that conversation, it might even be a good start to just talk to a child. Hey, tell me a little bit about your life. Tell me a little bit about your experiences. And it will open that door for you to learn about something that's different from our own. But you just really have to fight that pridefulness, that self-centeredness, that defensiveness. That's a big part. In what I've learned and what I've studied, we have a hard time addressing anything that we feel like could make us look imperfect, make us look like we're not a good person. And in reality, we all have this. We all struggle with this to some degree. And it's how much are you willing to look into yourself and address it versus how much is somebody maybe not willing to do that. And I think Jesus would absolutely come in, hold everybody's hand, walk with them, and love with them through their own stories and their own knowing.
I love how you mentioned though how it's we need to have we need to have discomfort in order to grow, and that's something that's not comfortable, but it's life. You know, we in order to grow anyway, you know, spiritually, you have to first be uncomfortable with how your life is in order to know that there needs to be a change. And with even, I mean, we're both sitting here and our legs are about to fall off because we both go to the same gym and it has destroyed us.
Yeah. But physically, mentally, spiritually, if you are not uncomfortable at some point in time, you're not growing. I mean, just even education, right? If you're putting yourself through any kind of an education, whether you were in middle school or high school, whatever your experience was, you were uncomfortable, but you had to be put in that spot to be able to gain more knowledge to go and move forward. Spiritually, it's the same thing. If you are not asking questions and asking hard questions and really digging into what does this mean to love people, then you're probably not growing. And there is so much room spiritually for grace in that. There's so much room to make mistakes. There's so much freedom because we have the Christ that we have the God that we have. So there's so much forgiveness, and I think that maybe that's the difference in what we feel from a society standpoint versus what we feel from a spiritual standpoint. So we believe in this creator that gave us so much ability to make mistakes and to be forgiven and to move forward. And maybe right now from a societal standpoint, we don't feel like we can make mistakes, even though we're going to. It's inevitable. So I do think that maybe that's a little bit of a disconnect, that we don't feel like we can make those mistakes or be forgiven for it if we do. And I just think that that's a fallacy. I don't think that that's a truth. I think if you are really doing the work that you need to do to get better, that even when you make mistakes, you're going to be growing, and that you are going to find yourself surrounded by people that love and care about you, that care about you enough to point out the fact that maybe you're unloving, but that they're going to be there and love you through that and into that growth. That's what a community of believers is in my mind.
What is your biggest fear right now in your job as a school counselor? What is your biggest fear, and what are you most excited for?
The excited part I'll answer first. I am so excited to see my kids again. I have missed them so much. And I know I'm saying the same things that probably all the other counselors, I know for sure that almost all of the counselors probably feel. Don't want to speak for them, but I miss my kids so much. And I'm so excited to be back and to see my kids, because that's where a lot of my joy is found. And I just can't wait. I can't wait for that. I think the part that I'm very fearful of is probably a very similar fear to everybody right now, of not really knowing what that's going to look like and not really knowing what it's going to take to adapt to whatever it does look like. So if that means right now my school specifically is planning on starting in with precautionary measures and following the CDC guidelines and good things. So is that going to last 2 weeks? Is it going to last 4 weeks? Is it going to be all semester? We just don't know. And so I think from that perspective, I have a little bit of fear in knowing how to prepare. I'm an Enneagram 1. So I'm like I like to be prepared in advance. That's something that's just natural to me. So I think that that's probably where my fear is. That being said, I do feel like God's given me peace in the sense of we've adapted once already, and we've learned a lot from that, things to do, things not to do, because we didn't know what we were doing the first time anyways. And so I do think that there's a piece of that I feel some comfort in, just because we're going to be able to work through this, whatever that looks like. I just pray for healing in that process. I pray that our numbers start to go down. I just pray that this starts to disseminate as we learn and grow. Where I see Jesus through this, one of my favorite Bible verses is Romans 12:12. So be joyful in hope, patient in affliction, and faithful in prayer. And I think that has always been like one of my go-tos, because it covers everything. It covers the hope piece. And it very much covers the affliction piece. And right now we're in a community wide and a society wide where patience and affliction is being tested. And I think that in all of this, that faithfulness and prayer piece is that guidance back to that hope. Jesus has shown up in the small details of everyday life. He's shown up in really big ways throughout this time as well. So I feel that our hope is found in that we will always overcome. We've been promised, and that will always be fulfilled. God always fulfills his promises, and there's more that's going to happen in our world between now and then. And I feel that Jesus has been able to care and support our students when that might be something that we so naturally take ownership of, and it's not ours to own. It's his to own. And I feel like during this time that has probably shown itself even more so, because when we're not there to physically see those kids and comfort them, he's always present to comfort them.
Thank you so much for watching this week's Good News episode. If you found this video helpful, please like and subscribe, and we will continue to drop a new video every Sunday. So stay tuned for next week's interview, where we talk with a local high school teacher, Madeline Gosey, about what we can do as a community to help the teachers during this time.